Can data alone fix a broken employer brand? No. Is leadership buy-in the number one blocker for EB success?
Yes. Well, we believe, and we're seeing this starting to evolve, where more and more employer branding is getting.
Where employer branding certainly is evolving. What used to just be about employee value proposition, great creative, career sites and social media posts is so much more. It's now about proving ROI, it's about getting leadership on board, and it's about aligning employer branding with business strategy. These kind of things was why I love chatting with people like Amit Parmar. Amit is CEO of Cliquify, and he has loads of conversations with people week in, week out, who are at the center of these kind of challenges. He also has access to great data sets that can really help you evolve and ride the wave of employer branding in times of great change. And also, stay to the end of the episode because we've got a nice free tool for you to use, which is an EB ROI calculator, which means not only you can listen to this, but you can get on and get starting quickly and start changing the way you're doing your employer branding. So let's get on with the chat. Amit, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, good. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. A bit of an early one, I think, for you. You're stateside, aren't you?
Yeah. It's 9 a.m. here, but I've been up since 6 there.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, so technically just before lunchtime for you and just after lunchtime for us. So we're pretty much on a par. Yeah. Right. So let's get started. What I want to do is some quick fire questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions and your answer can be yes, no, or maybe. And then we'll then get into the main chat. So let's give it a go. First one, is employer branding getting harder, not easier in 2025?
Harder.
Nice. Do most TA leaders still see EB as a nice to have?
Yes.
I like this. Can data alone fix a broken employer brand?
No.
Will budgets for EB content grow in the next 12 months?
Maybe.
I like that. Final one. This can be a sentence answer if you like. Go wild with this one. Is leadership buy-in the number one blocker for EB success?
Yes.
Nice. Cool. Right. So Amit, you've been, see, given what you do, given your background, given the company here, you've been at the center of a lot of employer branding conversations. Yeah. Let's say, you were at a dinner party, you had to explain Cliquify's role in shaping the industry to somebody. How would you frame it to them?
Yeah. And Chris, I just happened to be one at a dinner last night about this. So
there you go. It's fresh and this is brilliant.
What does Cliquify do, right? And basically, really framed it in the context of employer branding. And as I think about employer branding, it is frankly a budding field. I know we keep talking about it year after year, but in the minds of chief people officers and heads of talent, they continue to view employer branding as like, oh, I've got to go out there. Employer branding is going to help me attract better talent. Well, we believe, and we're seeing this starting to evolve, where more and more employer branding is getting into internal storytelling and engaging internal candidates. So there's a bigger push for internal communications connections as well.
That's the interesting one, isn't it? Because because we've been in the center of it, there is that assumption that people know about it. What we would do because, we'd be close to it for so long, but it is still, I suppose, surprising, not surprising, how much people don't know about it. So, but that's good because a lot of progress has been made, but there's still lots to be done to try and position employer branding as that really important strategic business assets. Let's say, look, if you had to write like a 1-year vision for employer branding, and based on the data that you're seeing, what would that vision look like? And where's the kind of the white spaces that very few organizations or people are tackling?
Yeah, great question, Chris. We actually have a maturity model that actually talks about, the evolution within a function from like foundational to world-class, right? And it's a multi-year process or approach in terms of what are the elements of foundational employer branding versus how do you kind of build the building blocks to get to world-class. As you think about the annual kind of vision, and it varies, right, depending on where where the colleagues and practitioners are at any given year from a maturity standpoint for employer branding, the way we see it a year from now with what's happening externally in the industry, of course, with AI generated content now, there's a massive issue with trust factor between society and employers and organizations in particular, institutions. And so
Mm,
as I think about the role of employer branding, let's say from a vision standpoint in a year, I do think there's a huge opportunity for employer branding professionals to really get in on the action in terms of, okay, not just content creation from an AI standpoint. No, that's like the bare bones, but really starting to
mm,
connect with talent leaders to understand what's happening inside the organization in terms of AI adoption. And then how does that relate in terms of skill sets that are going to be required for that organization moving forward, right? I mean, there's all this
mm,
talk about skill-based hiring now as an example, but there's something to that as AI, is infiltrating workplaces. What does that mean for employer branding in terms of messaging? Ernst& Young just released a study, 67% of workers around the world are very scared, if you will, of AI taking over their job.
mm.
As you think about a year from now, starting now, how do you, as employer branding professionals, start to take all of that anxiety that exists in the workplace to then ensure your storytelling with employees as well as candidates is aligned with that? Because I'm sure candidates are also asking, okay, hey, how is your organization using AI today? How is it going to impact my job?
Mm.
Right. So I think employer branding is a very special place to start to hone in on this discussions like that.
Is there maybe a space that people aren't really tackling, that kind of gap that you see from the data that you have and the conversations you have that is needed, but is not really being picked up enough? Like you could
Well,
say a few years ago, it was like employee advocacy, maybe, but actually more people are talking about employee advocacy and role in employee advocacy. But what's your view?
yeah, such a great question, Chris. So, look, employee advocacy or employee generated content, these are all areas that employer branding folks are focused on today, and they do a pretty good job, in my opinion, right? With that, to look at data in a very comprehensive way, right? So
Mm,
there's so much amazing work that happens across the entire spectrum of employer branding work today. What is the ROI of all of that, right? This ties just, hey, I brought in, X number of impressions, X number of engagements, X number of candidates. What is it
mm,
actually doing in terms of people feeling good about the workplace, right?
mm,
And how do you measure that? And there are ways to measure that. If you look at your engagement survey results, are they improving based on some of your strategies? This is not, fully related or fully causational with employer branding work, but there's some correlation there, right? I think there's a huge opportunity with connecting with the workforce planning function within enterprises as well.
yes.
Now, the workforce planning function, and even they're evolving inside the organization, right? Like from a maturity standpoint. But the workforce planning and talent management functions, depending on where they reside within HR, there's a lot of connection with employer branding with those functions. For example, what skills are you going to be looking for or attracting and retaining over the next 18 months, right? They have the data driven visibility to that. And then that, of course, in turn results in the type of content that you start to think about from a strategy standpoint. But really, I think there's this huge opportunity for employer branding people to get super close or closer with the workforce planning as well as the talent management functions within the enterprise.
When it comes to the data, what do you think is kind of the next, I don't use a grand word, but kind of next frontier of data that should be looked at? Data that's really going to help drive that kind of business case and strategic business nature of employer branding. Something that maybe we're not doing so much at the moment, but should be done and is being maybe made easier because of obviously the technology we have to hand these days.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. So, if I think about the CFO, all right, because when you think about the business, it's for them, it's all about hard numbers, right? And
Yes.
it's really top line and bottom line growth, or top line growth and bottom line efficiency, really, from a P&L statement and profit and loss statement. And the way I think about data as it relates to employer branding professionals is aligned with the workforce planning function. So, for example, if an organization is focused on very particular sales skills, right? What kind of sales skills you need to increase top line revenue? Well,
Mm.
you can actually take the work you're doing in employer branding associated with the sales organization, so attracting as well as retaining and engaging your existing sales force. You can align that pretty closely actually with how you are enabling top line revenue for that organization, right? Um,
Mm.
Often what I see, Chris, is, and there's some good work that happens in employer branding, but it's very reactive, right? I've got to launch a campaign to hire, 3 sales reps in Brazil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of a sudden now my focus for this week is just on those 3 sales reps in Brazil, right? But if you take a
Mm.
step back, start to measure and manage all of the amazing work that happens in one system, right? Platform. We almost call it, and we've actually coined it, and we're about to release this, Chris, which is Employer Brand Operating System, right? So if
Nice.
you had a platform to enable all of that in one place, as opposed to the fragmentation that exists in emails today, SharePoint sites, Excel spreadsheets, or Google Sheets, you name it,
Mm.
it gets very murky. The ROI analysis gets very murky pretty quickly. So really laying the foundation to understand, okay, what is driving top line revenue and bottom line efficiency for the company? And frankly, just reach out to your closest finance partner in your organization. And it's okay to ask questions, right? I guess early on in my career, I would reach out to my finance counterparts and say, hey, help me understand the business. What are the actual dollar levers that you measure, right? And it gets very clear pretty quickly in terms of how to measure your ROI, right?
Mm.
And of course, you have tools that enable that process as well. And it's not an overnight thing, Chris. That's one major item I want to point out. It takes time to really understand the complexity of a business. Of course, the global you are, the more complex the businesses are. Whether you're split by geography or certain PML within each country, and so on.
Mm.
Business.
Mm.
So, long story short, there's a lot of data that you can start to glean from the finance organization, and then take that back to your work and just ask this one simple question: how is the work you're doing today going to impact that lever that the CFO is talking to the CEO about on a daily basis?
It reminds me of a conversation I had so I was at a conference and I had a conversation about ROI and about kind of the language of business. And someone I was talking to said, like, well, you know, yes, we're in the people business, but also it's a numbers business, it's a commercial operation. So actually, you know, Richard Branson, didn't create Virgin just to have a bunch of happy people. He created a business that needed happy people and engaged people. So if you can speak the language of the top of the business, then fantastic. And it really helps in terms of changing the perception from being delivery and reactive to be consultative and strategic, doesn't it? Then the senior leaders understand more about the direction that you want to go in. But no, there's going to be a return in it for them as well.
Absolutely, Chris. The strategic process, what I've found in my experience, is it is all about how you ask the question. Asking the right questions of the CFO or your C-suite, or frankly, even the chief people officer, to be able, or talent leader, to say, okay, look, hey, Chris, we're working on these initiatives. Help me understand, how is this impacting the P&L? And that's a question for the
Mm.
finance person. If Chris, you were the finance person, just
Mm.
want to make sure we're aligned, right? And that's just that conversation alone can go a long way.
It's very true. Very, very true. So, we've touched on some of this already, but in terms of challenges facing practitioners right now, uh, there are there's lots of conversations about the challenges, facing this year, but also in previous years, certainly kind of during and post COVID. But what are the challenges that don't really get talked about? You don't really see them being talked about on LinkedIn. You have lots of conversations, lots of people. Kind of what are those challenges that maybe deserve to have a higher profile and be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, I love these questions, Chris. So thank you for really getting me going, here early in the morning here. So
No worries.
I do think, there's layers to the challenges. All right. If you're looking at the technology layer, which is a large part of my job today, right? And talking to colleagues, former colleagues, as well as my colleagues today, I think there's a lot of noise in the system with all these shiny objects that exist, right? And this is by the
Yeah.
virtue of the investment community, right? So the last 3 years or 4 years or so, tons, like billions of dollars were flooded into the HR tech market. And what you're seeing now is a result of those investments. Now you've got all these shiny objects, a lot of fragmentation in your tech stack. Specifically, even in employer branding, I can point out 5 different tools that an average employer branding person uses today.
That's a lot to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of fragmentation that exists, and I guess we can call it like user experience, right? So if you're asking your employee, and I'm going to hone it down to employer branding professionals in particular, you're asking an employee to send, capture a video of the day in the life, right? Which is very common these days. You're sending them to some tool. If you want to capture photos, you're sending them to another tool or maybe SharePoint, right? And then now you want to share that content from an advocacy standpoint. Now you have a third advocacy tool that you're pointing them to, right? So in just that example alone, you've got a major process and a workflow issue that frankly employees just are done with, right? Like they don't want yet another tool to just, they have their day job, right? So it hurts adoption, right? And I do think that's a major challenge in the industry as more and more like point solutions get added to the tech stack. And to be honest, I'm not seeing a lot of CIOs or the chief information officer roles being really proactive and saying, "Hey guys, stop the madness. You really need like a true tech strategy." It's not happening in the world of employer branding today, the way I see it.
And actually, you know what? Given the fact that there's so much more talk about technology because of AI, as in like fundamental business impact conversations because of AI, there is that danger of someone wants to have an answer when they're asked, "What is it your business is doing when it comes to AI?" "Oh yeah, we use this, this, and this. We got it covered off." But yeah, I like what you say about sort of there's that technology implementation strategy which is really important, because probably spending goodness how much time trying to pull different things together, but also maybe not getting the right technology in the first place. So it's very much, it needs to be fit for purpose, doesn't it?
Yeah, and spot on. Like what ends up happening, and I've seen this way too often, being on the other side where I used to purchase these technologies, right?
Yeah.
Is adoption challenges. So now you've put your name on the line with your leaders and said, okay, I'm going to invest, 100,000, I'm just making this number up, but $100,000 on this shiny object. And 6 months down the road, only like 5 users are using it, right? And so now you've got, that really challenges your credibility inside the organization, right? So you speak about ROI and all of these things back to the business conversation. And now you're stuck in this, implementation where you've got, you've spent all this money, you made the ROI case for it. So congrats to you for getting it approved. But now, okay, are you really thinking about it strategically to say, okay, why do we need all these different, platforms? Can we just do it in one single place while driving some efficiency and user experience, within the organization?
Yeah, nice. I was actually on another podcast I have, because I'm not busy enough, but another podcast I have, I was talking with a flexible workforce management platform, and actually I'd say probably 40% or 50% of the actual episode was taken up really talking about change management, and how that in itself is not only choosing the right technology, but to actually make sure it's rolled out amongst the right people and done in the right way. It's really important, take
Absolutely.
a subscription that we've taken, individually as people, and not really made the most of it. Times that by God knows how much when you're looking at a corporate solution. Yeah, you're right. It's an important conversation to be had. Well, that's great. Look, perfect segue to the next episode. So anyone who really wants to listen about AI and employer branding and talking about technology, then this is the next episode you're going to want to listen to. So have a look somewhere in this video on YouTube, or pop into the episode description on your podcast player of choice. And yeah, you'll hear a cracking conversation about AI specifically and employer branding. And also you've got something that people can go to straight away and start using. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So we've got an ROI calculator that, as a talent leader, I always wanted to see my employer branding leader come to me, right? Because we have, budgets to manage and so on, right? So this ROI calculator has been created based on 20 years of our experience in talent and branding leadership roles, and we're offering it to your listeners for free. So we'll drop a link to where to access that, and it's packed with really solid calculations in terms of how to easily calculate the value of your work today, from a ROI, from a dollar as well as time saving perspective.
Good stuff. Look, definitely make sure that's available. And yeah, thanks very much. Cheers for the chat. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.